The envelope sat on her workbench for 11 minutes before she touched it. She knew what it was. She recognized the heavy cream paper, the embossed seal, the weight of institutional importance that radiated from expensive stationery. Her hands had spent 11 years in this basement handling things far more valuable than paper. 16th century altarpieces. Flemish oil paintings worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Canvases that museums insured for figures she could not comprehend. Her hands did not tremble when she touched those priceless things. They trembled now. Willa Hartwell opened the envelope with a careful precision that defined everything about her work, sliding her finger beneath the flap rather than tearing it, preserving what did not need to be preserved because preservation had become her way of moving through the world. The card inside was simple, elegant, devastating. The Drummond Foundation cordially invites you to the Emerging Voices exhibition opening. Your daughter, Celeste Hartwell, has been selected as one of 5 young artists to debut original work in our main gallery. She read the words 3 times. Then a 4th. Her eyes kept returning to the name at the bottom of the invitation, printed in the same tasteful font that graced museum walls and charity announcements and the society pages of newspapers she never read. Everett Drummond. Patron. 19 years. 19 years since she had spoken that name aloud to another human being. 19 years since she had woken in his apartment to find him gone, the sheet still warm where his body had been, a note on the pillow that said nothing and everything simultaneously. 19 years since lawyers in expensive suits had appeared at her door with documents and threats and an offer she had refused but could not fight. 19 years since she had understood, with the clarity that only complete devastation provides, that love was not enough to protect you from people who had decided you did not matter. And now her daughter's name was printed on his foundation stationery. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you're watching from and what time it is where you're at. If you're new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. The Conservation Laboratory occupied the basement of the Whitfield Museum of Art, 3 floors beneath the galleries where visitors wandered and donors gathered and the world of culture conducted its careful performances. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting the particular flat brightness that allowed conservators to see every crack, every discoloration, every place where time had laid its hands on beauty and left marks. Willa had worked in this basement for 11 years. She had applied for the position 6 months after Celeste was born, desperate for work that would use her training without requiring her to be visible. The advertisement had specified someone with restoration experience, someone comfortable with long hours and detailed documentation and the particular loneliness of working with objects rather than people. She had been perfect for the job. What she had not known, what she could not have known, was that the Whitfield Museum of Art received significant funding from the Drummond Foundation. That the family whose name she had spent 6 months trying to forget underwrote the very institution that had become her sanctuary. By the time she understood this, it was too late to leave. She had built a life here, had become essential in ways that did not translate to titles or recognition. The senior conservators consulted her on difficult restorations. The curators requested her specifically when important acquisitions required assessment. She existed in the margins of a world that had never wanted her, doing work that mattered while remaining invisible to everyone who might recognize her face, including the man whose foundation paid her salary. The irony was not lost on her. It had never been lost on her. She set the invitation on her workbench and returned to the altarpiece she had been cleaning for 3 weeks. The panel painting depicted the Annunciation, the angel Gabriel appearing to Mary with news that would change everything. The Virgin's face showed an expression that art historians described as acceptance, as grace, as holy surrender to divine will. Willa had always thought she looked afraid. The phone in her pocket buzzed with a text message. She knew without looking that it was from Celeste. "Mom, did you see it yet? I got in. I actually got in." The words on the screen carried an excitement that made Willa's chest ache with pride and terror in equal measure. Her daughter had submitted work to the Drummond Foundation competition without telling her, had been selected on pure merit by judges who had no idea whose daughter they were choosing, had earned a place in galleries that her mother could only enter through the staff entrance. Celeste had done what Willa had dreamed of doing, 19 years ago, before dreams became luxuries she could not afford. She typed a response with fingers that felt clumsy on the small keyboard. "I saw it, baby. I am so proud of you. We will celebrate tonight." The response came immediately. "Best day of my life. Love you, Mom." Willa stared at those words until the screen dimmed. Then she set the phone face down on her workbench and returned to the altarpiece, to the careful work of removing centuries of grime from paint that had survived longer than most nations, to the meditation of restoration that had sustained her through years when nothing else could. But her hands were not steady now. And her mind was not on the angel's wings or the virgin's frightened acceptance or the delicate work of preservation. Her mind was on a night 19 years ago when she had been 20 years old and in love and carrying a secret she had planned to share with the man who had promised her forever. She had met Everett Drummond in the university library, in the art history section, on an October afternoon when the light through the windows had made everything look golden. She was a graduate student then, working on her thesis about restoration techniques in early Renaissance panel paintings, juggling 3 part-time jobs to pay for an education her family could not afford. He was 28, finishing a business degree that would prepare him to take over portions of his family's hospitality empire, though he had confessed to her later that he found the coursework suffocating. What he loved was art. What he loved was the way she talked about art, with a passion that made him feel things he had never been encouraged to feel. She had been reaching for a book on the top shelf, stretching on her toes, when he appeared beside her and retrieved it with the casual ease of someone who had never had to struggle to reach anything. "Here," he said. His voice was warm and curious, and entirely without the condescension she had learned to expect from people whose clothes cost more than her monthly rent. "Thank you." She took the book from his hands, their fingers brushing for a moment that should not have meant anything but did. "You are studying restoration," he observed, glancing at the titles she had already stacked on the study table nearby. "Panel paintings. Early Renaissance. The way pigments degrade differently based on substrate composition." He smiled at her then, a real smile, not the polished expression she would later learn he deployed at foundation events and family gatherings. "You speak about paint the way some people speak about music." "Paint is music," she said, surprising herself with her own boldness. "It is layered. It changes over time. It was created to be experienced." Something shifted in his expression, something that looked like recognition, like the sudden awareness of a door opening that you had not known existed. "Would you like to get coffee?" he asked, "and tell me more about how paint is music?" She should have said no. She knew even then that men who looked like him, who moved through the world with his particular confidence, did not belong in the life she was building for herself. She had too many jobs and too little time and too much at stake to risk on something as unreliable as attraction. But she had said yes. And for 7 months, she had believed that love could bridge any distance, that the differences between them were circumstances rather than barriers, that what they were building together was strong enough to survive anything. She had been so young. The laboratory door opened behind her, and Willa turned to find Dr. Aldine standing in the entrance. He was 73 years old, had worked in this basement for 4 decades, and noticed everything that happened within its walls even when he appeared to be entirely focused on his own projects. "You received the invitation," he said. "It was not a question. You knew she applied." "I was on the initial review committee. I recused myself when I recognized the name." He crossed the laboratory slowly, his footsteps measured, and settled into the chair beside her workbench with the careful movements of a man who had learned to accommodate his age. "She is extraordinarily talented, Willa." The other judges were unanimous. "I know she is talented. But you are not celebrating." Willa set down her cleaning tools and looked at the man who had become something like a mentor over the 11 years they had worked together. He had never asked about Celeste's father. He had never asked about the years before she came to the museum, about the graduate program she had abandoned, about the career she had not pursued. He had simply observed, over time, that there were parts of her history she did not discuss, and he had respected her silence. But he was observant. And kind. And perhaps the only person in the world who might understand what she was feeling without requiring her to explain it. "The exhibition opens on Saturday," she said finally. "There will be a reception. Donors. Board members. The Foundation's patron will give opening remarks." "Drummond," Dr. Aldine said quietly. She nodded. He was silent for a long moment, and in that silence Willa understood that he had known, or at least suspected, for longer than she realized. Perhaps from the beginning. Perhaps from the first time he had seen her daughter's face, had noticed the particular shape of her eyes, had connected the timing of Willa's arrival at the museum with the chronology of a child who would now be old enough to submit her own work to the very foundation whose money paid their salaries. "Does she know?" he asked. "No." "Does he?" "No." Dr. Aldine reached out and touched her hand briefly, a gesture of comfort that he rarely offered and that she rarely received. Secrets have weight, Willa. They are not meant to be carried forever. I know. But you are not ready to set this one down. She thought about the 19 years she had spent building a life from the wreckage of the one she had planned. The job she had worked, the degree she had finished in fragments over 6 years while raising a child alone, the small apartments they had moved through as she climbed slowly toward something like stability. She thought about the hundreds of bedtime stories she had read, the school plays she had attended in the audience seats where other children had 2 parents watching, the college applications she had helped Celeste complete with nothing to write in the section asking about family legacy. She thought about the check she had never cashed, the $50,000 that had sat in a drawer for 3 months before she burned it, the refusal to accept money from people who had treated her like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be considered. I have protected her from this for 18 years, Willa said. I cannot stop protecting her now. Even if protection means she never knows the truth. Willa turned back to the altarpiece, to the angel's wings that she had been cleaning with such care, to the Virgin Mary's frightened face that art historians had misread for centuries. I will tell her, she said, when the time is right. But not before her exhibition. Not before she has her moment to succeed on her own terms. Dr. Aldine rose from his chair slowly, and Willa heard him pause at the door before speaking again. I walked through the installation this morning, he said. I saw her paintings for the first time. And she paints like someone who has carried things she should not have had to carry. That comes from somewhere. Then he was gone, and Willa was alone with the altarpiece and the invitation and the weight of 19 years pressing down on her shoulders like hands she could not escape. 300 miles away, in an office that occupied the entire top floor of a building his great-grandfather had constructed, Everett Drummond stood at his window and watched the city unfold beneath him. He was 47 years old. He had grey at his temples and lines around his eyes and the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent 2 decades doing what was expected of him without ever being asked what he wanted. The hotels his family owned operated profitably across 3 continents. The foundation that bore his name supported the arts in ways that generated favorable press and useful tax advantages. His marriage to Marguerite Ashton Vale had produced the social benefits and political connections that such marriages were designed to produce. It had not produced children. It had not produced warmth. It had not produced a single morning in 20 years when Everett had woken beside his wife and felt what he had once felt in a studio apartment that smelled of turpentine and cheap coffee, watching a graduate student explain why the restoration of damaged paintings was its own form of creation. He thought about Willa Hartwell more often than he would ever admit. Not constantly, not obsessively, not in the consuming way he had thought about her in the months after she vanished. But persistently, recurrently, in the quiet moments between obligations, when there was nothing to distract him from the hollowness that had taken up permanent residence in his chest. He had searched for her. In the beginning, he had searched desperately, hiring investigators who charged obscene hourly rates and delivered nothing. She had disappeared completely, as if the 7 months they had spent together had been something he imagined, as if the woman he loved had never existed at all. His father had assured him it was for the best. She accepted the settlement, his father had said, his voice carrying the particular satisfaction of a man who had solved a problem. She took the money and left. Women like her always do. Everett had believed him. What choice did he have? He was 28 years old and still, in ways he would not recognize for years, entirely under his father's control. The document his father showed him bore what appeared to be her signature. The bank records showed a check had cleared. The evidence suggested she had been exactly what his family suspected all along. A woman looking for money. A woman playing a long game. A woman who had never loved him at all. He had tried to believe this. For months, for years, he had tried to reshape his memories to fit the narrative his father had constructed. He had married Marguerite because she came from the right family and expected nothing from him beyond the performance of partnership. He had built the foundation because it was expected of him, had delivered the speeches and attended the galas and smiled for photographs until smiling became something his face did automatically, without any connection to what he felt inside. But he had never stopped thinking about her. And 5 years ago, after his father's death, Everett had finally gained access to the foundation's complete financial records. There was no settlement. There was no payment. There was no evidence that Willa Hartwell had ever received a single dollar from his family. His father had lied. The realization had not freed him. It had only deepened his paralysis, had transformed his regret into something closer to despair. Because if his father had lied about the money, What else had been manufactured? What else had been designed to keep him compliant? What else had he sacrificed on the altar of a story that had never been true? He had resumed his search then, with resources his younger self could not have imagined. But too much time had passed. Willa had built a life specifically designed to be unfindable, had changed addresses and left no forwarding information, and existed in whatever margins the world offered to people who wanted to disappear. He had never found her. Everett turned from the window to find his assistant standing in the doorway, holding a leather portfolio that contained the evening's obligations. "The exhibition catalogue requires your final approval," the assistant said. "The opening is Saturday. Marketing needs the remarks you will be delivering." Everett accepted the portfolio and set it on his desk without opening it. Another exhibition. Another evening of performing enthusiasm for art he barely saw because he was too busy being observed. Another opportunity to play the role his family had designed for him, the cultured philanthropist, the patron of emerging voices, the successful heir who had fulfilled every expectation. "Is there anything else?" he asked. "Your wife called. She wanted to remind you about dinner with her family this evening." "Cancel it." Tell her I have foundation obligations. Tell her whatever you need to tell her." The assistant nodded and retreated, and Everett was alone again with the portfolio and the window and the view of a city that had watched him become everything he had never wanted to be. He opened the portfolio eventually. He reviewed the catalogue with the perfunctory attention he gave to all such documents, scanning the pages for anything that required his actual consideration rather than his automatic approval. 5 young artists. 5 sets of work that would be displayed in galleries his foundation funded. 5 names he would praise in his opening remarks without knowing anything meaningful about the people behind them. The names blurred together. The biographical paragraphs ran into each other. The photographs of artwork failed to register. He closed the portfolio and set it aside. He did not see the name Celeste Hartwell. He did not notice the photograph of a young woman whose eyes were the precise shade of brown he saw each morning in his own mirror. He did not understand that his daughter's paintings would be hanging in his galleries on Saturday evening, and that the woman he had never stopped loving would be watching from somewhere in the crowd, carrying a secret that had shaped both their lives for 19 years. Some distances are too vast to bridge. Some silences are too deep to break. And some truths wait so long to surface that by the time they arrive, the world has already rearranged itself around the space where they should have been. Willa left the museum at 7:43 that evening, later than she had intended. The Flemish altarpiece had required more attention than she had anticipated, and she had lost herself in the work the way she always did when her mind needed somewhere to hide. The bus ride home took 37 minutes. She knew the route so well that she could have navigated it with her eyes closed, could have counted the stops by the rhythm of the brakes and the changing sounds of the neighborhoods they passed through. Expensive areas first, where the museum's donors lived in brownstones and townhouses. Then gradually less expensive, the buildings older, the streets narrower, the people waiting at the stops wearing the particular tiredness of those who worked with their hands or their feet rather than their names. She belonged to this second world now. She had made her peace with it years ago. The apartment she shared with Celeste occupied the 3rd floor of a building that had been constructed in the 1920s and maintained intermittently since. The stairs creaked. The radiators clanked. The windows let in drafts that no amount of weather stripping could completely eliminate. But it was theirs. They had lived here for 4 years, longer than anywhere else since Celeste was born, and the walls held the accumulated weight of a life that had finally stopped moving. "Mom." Celeste was waiting in the kitchen when Willa opened the door, bouncing on her feet with an excitement that made her look younger than 18, made her look like the child she had been rather than the woman she was becoming. "Mom, you saw it right. You got the invitation." "I got it. I am so sorry I did not tell you I applied. I know I should have, but I was scared you would worry, and I did not want to get your hopes up in case I did not get in, and then when I did get in I wanted it to be a surprise, but now I am worried you are mad at me for keeping it secret." The words tumbled out in a rush, the way Celeste's words always did when she was nervous about how someone would react. She had been like this since childhood, apologizing preemptively for things that did not require apology, as if she had absorbed from somewhere the belief that taking up space was something that needed to be justified. Willa set down her bag and crossed the small kitchen to pull her daughter into a hug. "I am not mad at you. I am proud of you. I am so incredibly proud of you I do not have words for it." Celeste relaxed into the embrace, and for a moment they stood there together in the kitchen where they had shared hundreds of meals and thousands of conversations, holding on to each other the way they always had. "I cannot believe it is actually happening," Celeste said when they finally separated. "I am going to have my paintings in a real gallery. People are going to see them. Critics are going to review them. It is everything I ever wanted, and I am terrified and excited, and I do not know how to feel all of these things at once." "You feel them all at once. That is how big moments work." Celeste laughed, a sound that always made Willa's heart expand, and began pulling containers from the refrigerator. "I made dinner. Nothing fancy, just that pasta you like with the vegetables. I figured we could celebrate properly after the exhibition, but tonight we should at least eat something together and talk about what I need to do to get ready." They ate at the small table by the window, the same table where Celeste had done her homework for 12 years of school and where Willa had sat with her coffee on countless mornings before the sun rose, preparing herself for another day of invisible labor. The pasta was good. The conversation was better. Celeste talked about her paintings and her professors and the other artists who had been selected, and Willa listened with the particular attention she had always given her daughter, the attention of someone for whom this child was the center of everything. But beneath the listening, beneath the pride and the celebration and the joy of watching Celeste's excitement, Willa was calculating. The exhibition was Saturday. 5 days away. Everett would be there, delivering opening remarks, playing the patron, moving through a room that would contain both his daughter and the woman he had abandoned without knowing either of them was there. She could keep Celeste away. She could invent an illness, a conflict, a reason why neither of them should attend an event that Celeste had earned through her own talent and work. She could extend the protection she had provided for 18 years, could prevent the collision that felt increasingly inevitable. But that would mean taking something from Celeste that belonged to her. That would mean letting fear continue to dictate the shape of their lives. That would mean looking into her daughter's eyes and lying about something that mattered. She could not do that. She would go to the exhibition. She would stay in the back, invisible, the way she had learned to be invisible in institutions like this one. She would watch her daughter succeed, would witness the moment that Celeste had earned, would carry the secret a little longer while her child claimed the space she deserved. And after the exhibition, after Celeste had her moment of pure achievement, untainted by the complications of her parentage, then Willa would tell her the truth. "Mom." Celeste's voice cut through her thoughts. "You have that look you get sometimes. The one where you are thinking about something you do not want to talk about." Willa smiled, feeling the expression sit awkwardly on her face. "I am just thinking about how fast you have grown. One moment you were a baby who would not sleep through the night, and now you are going to have your paintings in a museum. It is the same museum where you work." "I know. That is kind of perfect, actually. You have spent all these years taking care of other people's art, and now my art gets to be in the same building." The observation was innocent. Celeste had no idea of the significance beneath her words, no understanding of the tangled history that connected their family to the institution that employed her mother and funded her exhibition. She saw only the surface, the mother who worked with beautiful things and the daughter who created them, 2 generations linked by their love of art. She did not see the third person in their family portrait, the absent figure whose shadow had shaped everything about the way they lived. "Do you ever wonder about him?" Celeste asked suddenly. "My father, I mean." The question landed like a stone in still water. Celeste rarely asked about her father, had learned early that the subject caused her mother pain and had developed the careful habit of avoiding it. But tonight, perhaps because of the excitement, perhaps because the approaching exhibition had opened something in her that had been closed, she was asking. Willa set down her fork and looked at her daughter directly. "What do you want to know?" "I do not know. Anything, I guess. You never talk about him and I have always respected that, but sometimes I wonder. Like who he was. What happened. Why he was not part of our lives." Each question was a knife. Each question was a door Willa had kept locked for 18 years. Each question deserved an answer that she was not prepared to give, not tonight, not 5 days before Celeste would stand in a gallery funded by the father she had never known. "Your father was someone I loved very much," Willa said carefully. "He was not able to be part of our lives. It was not your fault and it was not about you." "Was it about you?" "It was about circumstances. About choices he made that I could not change." "Do you hate him?" Willa considered the question. She had hated Everett once, in the months after he vanished, in the years when she worked 3 jobs to support a child she was raising alone. She had hated him when Celeste asked why other children had 2 parents and she could not explain. She had hated him when the loneliness became so heavy she could barely stand under the weight of it. But hatred required energy. Hatred required attention. And eventually she had realized that she did not have enough of either to waste on someone who was not there. "I do not hate him," she said finally. "I wish things had been different. I wish he had made different choices. But hating him would not change anything, and I have spent all my energy on building a life for us instead." Celeste nodded slowly, absorbing this. "Someday will you tell me the whole story?" "Someday. Yes. When the time is right." The promise felt both genuine and impossible. There would never be a right time. There would only be a time when she could no longer avoid it, when circumstances forced the truth into the open whether she was ready or not. That time was coming. She could feel it approaching like a storm on the horizon. But not tonight. Tonight was for celebration. Tonight was for watching her daughter glow with the particular light of someone whose dreams are becoming real. Tonight was for holding the secret a little longer, for preserving the peace a little longer, for giving Celeste the gift of not knowing. The exhibition was Saturday. 5 days away. After that, everything would change. The week before the exhibition passed in a blur of preparation and suppressed anxiety. Willa worked late every night, telling herself that the Flemish altarpiece required her attention, that the delicate work of cleaning centuries-old paint could not be rushed, that her obligation to the museum superseded her obligation to be present for her daughter's excitement. The truth was simpler. The truth was that she could not face Celeste's joy without her own terror bleeding through. The truth was that every conversation about the exhibition reminded her of what was coming, and every reminder made the weight on her chest a little heavier. She told Celeste she was working overtime to clear her schedule for Saturday. She told herself that the lie was harmless, that a few days of distance would not damage the relationship she had built with her daughter over 18 years. She told herself that protection sometimes looked like absence, that keeping Celeste safe sometimes meant keeping her at arm's length. She was not sure she believed any of it. In the conservation laboratory, surrounded by paintings that had survived centuries, she found a temporary peace. The work required her complete attention. The careful application of solvents, the gentle removal of accumulated grime, the slow revelation of colors that had been hidden beneath years of neglect. There was something meditative about restoration, something that allowed her to set aside the present and exist only in the immediate task. But even there, in the basement of the museum, Everett's presence haunted her. His foundation's name was engraved on the plaque outside the laboratory door, one of many plaques throughout the building acknowledging the donors whose money made the institution possible. His family's money had purchased the equipment she used every day, had funded the research projects that allowed her to develop new conservation techniques, had paid her salary for 11 years while she remained invisible to the man himself. She wondered sometimes whether he thought of her, whether the years had softened his certainty that he had made the right choice, whether he ever looked at the life he had built and felt the particular emptiness that came from choosing security over love. She suspected he did not. Men like Everett, men who had been raised to believe that wealth could solve any problem, rarely questioned the foundations of their own comfort. They moved through the world protected by walls of money and status and family name, insulated from the consequences of their choices in ways that people like her could never be. But she did not really know. She had not spoken to him in 19 years. She had no way of knowing who he had become, what regrets he carried, what silences lived inside him. All she knew was that in 5 days he would stand in a room with his daughter and not know who she was. And Willa would be there, watching, carrying a secret that had shaped both their lives, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally demand to be spoken. The final days before the exhibition collapsed into hours, then minutes, then the strange suspended time of imminent arrival. Saturday morning Willa woke before dawn, her body refusing to grant her the mercy of additional sleep. She lay in the darkness of her bedroom and listened to the sounds of the city waking up outside her window, the distant rumble of early traffic, the clatter of garbage trucks, the ordinary symphony of a world that did not know this day was different from any other. At 6:30 she rose and dressed in the clothes she had laid out the night before, a simple black dress she had borrowed from a colleague at the museum, modest enough to avoid attention but appropriate enough to not embarrass her daughter. She studied herself in the mirror and saw a woman she barely recognized, a woman who looked composed and ordinary and entirely unlike someone whose world was about to shift on its axis. She made coffee in the kitchen while Celeste slept. The familiar routine was grounding, the measurement of grounds, the careful pour of water, the patience required to let it brew properly. She had learned patience over the past 18 years. She had learned to wait for things she could not rush, to endure circumstances she could not change, to find meaning in the slow accumulation of small moments rather than the grand gestures she had once imagined her life would contain. The coffee was good. The morning light through the kitchen window was soft and golden. The apartment was quiet in the particular way of early mornings, holding its breath before the day began. Celeste appeared at 8:30, her eyes still heavy with sleep but her face already beginning to show the nervous excitement that had been building all week. "Today is the day," she said, her voice somewhere between a statement and a question. "Today is the day." They ate breakfast together, neither of them speaking much, both of them occupied with thoughts they did not share. Celeste reviewed her artist statement for the 20th time, mouthing the words silently as she committed them to memory. Willa watched her daughter and tried to memorize this moment, this last morning before everything changed, this final hour of the world they had built together in its current form. After today, nothing would be the same. The question was whether what came after would be better or worse than what came before. The exhibition opened at 6 o'clock. Willa arrived early, slipping through the staff entrance at 4:30 while the caterers were still setting up and the gallery lights were still being adjusted. She had worked in this building for 11 years. She knew its rhythms, its back passages, its hidden spaces where someone who wanted to remain unseen could observe without being observed. She walked through the exhibition slowly, looking at her daughter's paintings for the first time. Celeste had kept her work private during the application process, had refused to show Willa the images she was submitting, had insisted that she wanted her mother to experience them the way a stranger would, fresh and unbiased and free from the particular lens of familial love. Now, standing in the quiet gallery before the crowds arrived, Willa understood why. The paintings were about her. Not literally. The images themselves were abstract, shapes and colors and textures that did not represent anything recognizable. But the feeling in them, the particular weight that Dr. Aldine had mentioned, the sense of something carried too long and held too tightly. That was her. That was their life. That was 18 years of silence and sacrifice and the particular love that grew in the spaces where answers should have been. Celeste had painted what she did not know, had given form to questions she had never asked aloud, had created something beautiful and terrible and true from the inheritance of absence that Willa had passed down to her without meaning to. Willa stood before the largest canvas for a long time. It depicted hands, rendered with extraordinary precision, holding something too small to identify. The hands were open, the fingers gentle, the grip uncertain. It was impossible to tell whether the hands were receiving or releasing, whether what they held was arriving or departing, whether the gesture was one of welcome or goodbye. It was the most honest thing anyone had ever made about her life. And Everett would see it. Tonight. Without knowing what he was looking at. Without understanding that these paintings were a letter written in color and form, addressed to a father who had never been there to receive it. Willa turned away from the canvas and found a place in the shadows at the edge of the gallery, where she could see everything without being seen. The guests began arriving at 5:45, a slow trickle that became a steady stream that became a crowd. Donors in expensive clothes. Critics with notebooks. Art students who had won tickets through their programs. The carefully curated audience that attended these events to confirm their own taste and network with others who shared it. Willa watched from her corner and felt like a ghost at her own haunting. Celeste appeared at 6:15, radiant in a dress they had found together at a consignment shop, her natural beauty amplified by the particular glow of someone living their dream in real time. She moved through the crowd with a grace that Willa did not remember teaching her, accepting compliments and answering questions and performing the role of emerging artist with a confidence that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. She was magnificent. She was everything Willa had hoped she would become. And she had no idea that her father was about to walk through the door. Everett arrived at 6:43, surrounded by the particular constellation of assistants and board members and family associates that always accompanied him to public events. He wore a dark suit that fit perfectly and an expression of practiced warmth that Willa recognized immediately, the face he showed the world, the performance of the person he was supposed to be. She had seen that face 19 years ago. She had watched him put it on and take it off, had known the difference between who he pretended to be and who he actually was. She had loved the person beneath the performance. She had no idea who he was now. He moved through the gallery with the ease of someone who had spent his entire life in rooms like this one, greeting donors by name, accepting praise for his foundation's work, playing the patron with the particular expertise of a man who had inherited his role rather than earning it. Then he stopped. He was standing before Celeste's largest canvas, the one with the hands, the one that had made Willa's breath catch in her throat. Something in his posture changed. His shoulders stiffened. His head tilted at an angle that suggested concentration rather than casual observation. He was actually looking at the painting. Not performing interest. Actually seeing it. Willa watched him study her daughter's work and felt something she had not expected. Not anger. Not fear. Something more complicated. Something that might have been grief, or recognition, or the particular ache of watching someone you once loved discover something you had both lost without knowing it. Everett turned from the painting and scanned the room. And found her. Across the gallery, through the crowd of donors and critics and carefully dressed strangers, his eyes met hers. The years collapsed. 19 years of silence. 19 years of separate lives. 19 years of carrying a secret that had shaped everything about who she had become. None of it mattered in that moment. None of it existed. There was only his face, older now but still recognizable. There was only his eyes, wide with a shock that transformed his practiced composure into something raw and real. There was only the distance between them, a distance that had once felt insurmountable but now felt like nothing more than a few steps across a crowded room. He began to move toward her. Willa did not run. She had spent 19 years running, 19 years hiding, 19 years building walls between herself and the man who had broken her heart without even being present to watch it shatter. She was tired of running. She stood her ground and watched him approach, and felt the weight of everything she had carried beginning to shift, beginning to move, beginning to demand acknowledgement. Willa. His voice was the same. That was what undid her. After everything that had changed, after all the years and all the distance and all the silence, his voice speaking her name was exactly the same as it had been on an October afternoon in a library when he had helped her reach a book on the top shelf. Everett. You are here. I looked for you. For years I looked for you. I did not want to be found. The words landed between them like stones dropped into still water. He flinched slightly, absorbing the impact, and Willa felt a small satisfaction that she immediately regretted. She had not come here to wound him. She had not come here to relive the pain of 19 years ago. She had come here to watch her daughter succeed, and anything else was complication she could not afford. But he was standing in front of her now, and the questions she had carried for so long were rising to the surface, demanding answers she had given up hope of receiving. The painter, he said. His voice was careful now, uncertain in a way she had never heard from him before. Celeste Hartwell. She is why you are here. Yes. She is your daughter. Yes. Something shifted in his expression. Willa watched him process the information, watched him begin to calculate dates and possibilities, watched the comprehension arrive like dawn breaking over a landscape that had been dark for too long. How old is she? 18. 19 in April. The mathematics were simple. July conception. April birth. 1 month after he had vanished from her life without explanation or farewell. She could see him doing the calculation. Could see the answer arriving. Could see his face transform as he understood what she had been carrying alone for almost 2 decades. She is mine, he said. The words were barely audible, more breath than sound. Our daughter. I have a daughter. You have a daughter you abandoned before she was born. Willa kept her voice low, controlled, conscious of the crowd around them who might be watching. You have a daughter you never knew about because you disappeared and sent lawyers to threaten me into silence. I did not send lawyers. I did not know. Your father did. Everett closed his eyes. The pain that crossed his face looked genuine, but Willa had been fooled by his performance once before. She was not prepared to trust what she saw now. He told me you took the money, Everett said. He showed me documents. A signed agreement. A cashed check. He said you were exactly what he suspected all along. I never signed anything. I never cashed anything. I burned the check and walked away and built a life where no one could find me. I know. He opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression she could not read. I found out after he died. I went through the foundation records and there was no payment. No agreement. Nothing. He lied to me about all of it. And you believed him. I was 28 years old and I had spent my entire life believing him. I did not know how to do anything else. The excuse was inadequate. Willa knew it. He knew it. But it was also, she suspected, the truth. She remembered the Everett she had known, the man who loved art and ideas but flinched when his father entered a room, the man who dreamed of freedom but had never learned how to fight for it. He had been weak. He had made a choice that destroyed her life. And now, 19 years later, he was standing in front of her asking for something she was not sure she could give. "Where is she?" he asked. "Celeste. Where is she now?" Willa turned slightly and scanned the crowd. Celeste was across the gallery, speaking with an older woman whose jewelry suggested significant purchasing power. She was animated and confident and completely unaware that her parents were reunited for the first time in 19 years, discussing her existence across a distance that had never felt so small. "She does not know," Willa said. "About you. About any of it. You never told her." "I told her that her father was someone I loved. That he was not able to be part of our lives. That it was not her fault." Everett was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "I want to meet her." "No. Willa. Not here. Not like this." She turned back to face him, and the anger that had been building beneath her composure finally broke through. "You do not get to walk into her life 19 years late and expect to be welcomed. You do not get to claim her just because you finally figured out the truth. She is my daughter. I raised her. I sacrificed everything for her. And you were not there. I know. So do not stand here and tell me you want to meet her as if that is something you have any right to demand. I am not demanding. I am asking." The distinction meant nothing. The request felt like invasion. For 18 years Willa had protected Celeste from this moment, had built walls around their small family to keep out the complications and the questions and the particular pain of loving someone whose other parent had chosen not to exist. And now he wanted to tear those walls down in a single evening. "She is my daughter too," Everett said. His voice was quiet but firm. "I understand that I have not earned the right to call her that. I understand that you have every reason to refuse me. But she exists because we loved each other once. And I have spent 19 years mourning a family I did not know I had." The words hit Willa somewhere deep. The place where she had stored all the grief and anger and lonely nights when she wished she could share the weight with someone who understood. But she could not afford to feel that now. Not here. Not with Celeste across the room and Everett in front of her and a crowd of strangers waiting to witness whatever happened next. "After the exhibition," she said finally. "After she has had her moment. We will talk then." "When?" "I do not know." "Willa." "I said I do not know." She met his eyes with a steadiness that cost her everything she had. "I have protected her for 18 years. I will not stop protecting her now just because you finally showed up." "I never stopped looking for you," Everett said. "I need you to know that. Every year. Every birthday. Every moment when I wondered who she might be becoming. I looked. But you did not find us." "No. And here we are anyway." The observation hung between them, heavy with implication. Here they were, in a gallery funded by his foundation, surrounded by paintings created by their daughter, connected by a history that neither of them could escape no matter how far they had traveled from it. "Mom." The voice came from behind Willa, and she turned to find Celeste approaching with a concerned expression. "Mom, is everything okay? You look like you have been crying." Willa had not realized tears had escaped. She wiped them quickly and forced a smile that felt brittle on her face. "I am fine, sweetheart. I was just looking at your paintings. They moved me more than I expected." Celeste glanced between her mother and Everett, and Willa saw the perceptiveness that had always defined her daughter's relationship with the world. She was putting pieces together. Not the right pieces, not yet, but pieces nonetheless. "Mr. Drummond," Celeste said politely, extending her hand. "Thank you so much for this opportunity. Your foundation has given me something I never thought I would have." Everett took her hand, and Willa watched his face carefully. The emotion there was not hidden quickly enough. The recognition, the wonder, the grief of meeting someone you should have known from their first breath. "The opportunity was entirely earned," he said. His voice was thick. "Your work is extraordinary. That is very kind. It is not kindness. It is truth." He held her hand a moment longer than necessary before releasing it. "You paint like someone who has carried things she should not have had to carry." Celeste blinked at the observation, and Willa saw her daughter's eyes go slightly wide. It was too close to what Dr. Aldine had said. too close to what the paintings themselves revealed. "Thank you," Celeste said quietly. "That means more than you know." She excused herself to return to other guests, and Willa and Everett were alone again in the middle of a crowd that had not noticed anything unusual about their conversation. "She looks like both of us," Everett said. His eyes followed Celeste across the gallery. "Your grace and my stubbornness and something else entirely. Something that is only hers." "She is only hers," Willa said. "She is the person she made herself. I had something to do with it, but not everything. And I had nothing. No." The word was final. Absolute. True. And it broke something in Everett's face that Willa had not known was still capable of breaking. "After the exhibition," he said again, "we will talk." "Yes. I will be waiting." He turned and walked away, and Willa watched him go, watched him reassemble the performance of ease and confidence that had slipped during their conversation, watched him become again the man the world expected him to be. But she had seen beneath the surface. She had seen the grief and the longing and the genuine shock of discovering what he had lost. It was not enough to forgive him. It was not enough to bridge 19 years of absence. It was not enough to undo the damage or heal the wounds or restore what had been destroyed. But it was something. It was a beginning. It was the first word of a conversation that would take years to complete, if they could complete it at all. The exhibition continued around her. Guests admired Celeste's paintings. Critics wrote notes in their small notebooks. Donors discussed investment and influence and the particular currency of cultural capital. And Willa stood in the corner, holding a secret that was no longer entirely hers, waiting for the moment when everything would change. She did not know what came next. She only knew that it was finally coming. The exhibition ended at 10:15. Willa watched from her corner as the crowd thinned, as donors said their farewells and critics closed their notebooks and the gallery slowly emptied of everyone except the staff who would spend the next hour returning the space to its usual order. She had not moved from her position since her conversation with Everett. She had not approached Celeste again. She had simply watched and waited and tried to prepare herself for what came next. Celeste found her at 10:30, her face flushed with the particular exhaustion that follows sustained excitement. "Mom. There you are. I have been looking everywhere. I have been here. Are you okay? You disappeared after you talked to that man. Mr. Drummond." "I am fine. Just tired." Celeste studied her with the perceptiveness that had always made lying to her difficult. "There was something happening between you two. I could tell. You were both crying. We knew each other a long time ago. Before you were born. Knew each other how?" The question was inevitable. Willa had known it was coming from the moment Everett appeared in the gallery. But she was not prepared to answer it here, in this space that belonged to her daughter's achievement, surrounded by the paintings that had brought them both to this moment. "I will tell you everything," Willa said. "I promise. But not tonight. Tonight is about you. Mom. Please. Let me have tonight to figure out how to say it." Celeste was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly, accepting the delay even though Willa could see the questions multiplying behind her eyes. "Okay. But you have to actually tell me. No more deflecting. No more saying it is not the right time. I will tell you. Tomorrow. Promise. Promise." They gathered Celeste's things and made their way to the staff exit, avoiding the front doors where photographers might still be lingering. The night air was cool, carrying the particular crispness of early autumn, and Willa breathed it in deeply as they walked toward the bus stop. The ride home was quiet. Celeste leaned against the window and watched the city pass, her expression distant in a way that suggested she was processing everything that had happened. Willa sat beside her and tried to organize the words she would need tomorrow, the sentences that would reshape her daughter's understanding of everything she had believed about her own history. There was no good way to say it. There was no arrangement of language that would make the truth easier to hear. She could only offer it as honestly as possible and hope that 18 years of love and trust would be enough to survive the revelation. When they reached their apartment, Celeste went straight to her room without saying goodnight. Willa did not follow her. She understood the need for space, for time to sit with the strangeness of the evening, for the privacy to wonder without being observed. She made herself tea in the kitchen and sat at the table by the window, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the man she had loved 19 years ago. Everett had looked old. That was what struck her most. Not elderly, not decrepit, but worn in a way that suggested the years had not been kind to whatever lived inside him. He had built everything his family demanded. He had married appropriately and managed responsibly and performed the role of successful heir with apparent competence. But something in his eyes had been hollow. Something in his face had carried the particular grief of a man who had gotten everything he was supposed to want and found it insufficient. She wondered if he thought about her as often as she thought about him. She wondered if the years had softened his certainty that he had made the right choice. She wondered if he lay awake at night, as she sometimes did, imagining the life they might have built together if circumstances had been different. She wondered if any of it mattered now. The tea grew cold in her hands. The city lights blurred through the window. The night stretched on toward morning, and Willa did not sleep. 300 miles away, in the penthouse apartment that had never felt like home, Everett stood at his window and watched the same night pass. Marguerite was in the bedroom, asleep or pretending to be. He had not spoken to her since returning from the exhibition. He was not sure he was capable of speaking to anyone right now. He had a daughter. The words repeated in his mind like a prayer, like an accusation, like the answer to a question he had been asking for 19 years without knowing what he was asking. A daughter. 18 years old. Brilliant and beautiful and entirely unknown to him. Raised by the woman he had loved, in circumstances he could not imagine, without any contribution from him beyond the biological material that had created her. He had missed everything. First steps. First words. First day of school. Every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary evening when families gathered around dinner tables and shared the small moments that accumulated into lives. He had missed all of it. And it was his fault. He could blame his father. He had blamed his father for years, had raged internally against the manipulation and the lies and the careful destruction of the only genuine love he had ever known. But his father had not forced him to leave that apartment 19 years ago. His father had not held a gun to his head and demanded compliance. His father had simply presented consequences and trusted that his son was too weak to resist them. And he had been right. Everett had been weak. He had made a choice that destroyed 3 lives, his own, Willa's, and the daughter who had grown up believing her father had not wanted her. He had chosen comfort over courage, security over love, the approval of a man who was now dead over the woman who had made him feel alive. There was no redemption for that. There was no apology that could bridge 19 years. There was only the hollow reality of standing in an expensive apartment, surrounded by everything money could buy, and understanding that he had traded the only thing that mattered for a life that meant nothing. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant, confirming arrangements for tomorrow's board meeting. He ignored it. The board could wait. The foundation could wait. Everything that had consumed his life for 2 decades could wait while he stood at this window and tried to comprehend the magnitude of what he had lost. After the exhibition, Willa had said, "We will talk." But she had not said when. She had not said how. She had not given him any indication of whether the conversation would be an opening or a closing, a beginning or a final farewell. He would wait. He had no choice but to wait. After 19 years of searching, after 19 years of wondering, after 19 years of carrying the weight of a love he had never stopped feeling, he would wait however long it took. Because she was right. He had no claims here. He had no rights. He had only the hope that somewhere in the wreckage of what he had destroyed, there might be enough remaining to build something new. Morning came the way mornings always came, indifferent to the significance of what would happen within it. Willa made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and waited for her daughter to emerge from her room. The words she had rehearsed all night felt inadequate now, thin and fragile and entirely insufficient for the weight of what they needed to carry. Celeste appeared at 9:30, her eyes shadowed with the evidence of her own sleepless night. She poured herself coffee and sat across from her mother without speaking, waiting. "The man at the exhibition," Willa began. "Everett Drummond. I did not just know him a long time ago. I loved him. We were together for 7 months when I was in graduate school." Celeste's expression did not change. She was listening, absorbing, reserving judgment until she had all the information. "We met in the library. He was getting a business degree. I was working on my thesis about restoration techniques. He was different from anyone I had ever known. Wealthy, yes, but also curious and kind and genuinely interested in the things I cared about." "What happened?" "I got pregnant." The words landed between them like stones. Celeste's coffee cup paused halfway to her mouth. He disappeared, Willa continued. One morning I woke up and he was gone. His apartment was empty. His phone was disconnected. He left a note that said he was sorry and that his family had obligations he could not escape. He left because you were pregnant. I do not know. I never got to tell him. By the time I knew for certain, he was already gone. Celeste set down her coffee cup carefully. Her hands were trembling slightly. 3 days after he left, lawyers showed up at my apartment. They represented his family. They offered me money to disappear. $50,000 to sign a document saying I would never contact him or make any claims. Did you take it? No. I burned the check. But I could not fight them either. They made it clear what would happen if I tried. My scholarships would disappear. My academic career would be destroyed. They would manufacture claims that would follow me forever. So you disappeared. I transferred to another school. I changed my address. I built a life where no one could find me, even if they looked. Did he look? Willa paused. This was the part she was least certain about, the part that complicated the narrative she had constructed over 19 years. He says he did. Last night, he said he searched for years. He said his father lied to him, told him I had taken the money and signed the agreement. He said he only found out the truth after his father died. Do you believe him? I do not know. I believed him once and it destroyed my life. I do not know if I am capable of believing him again. Celeste was quiet for a long time. Willa watched her daughter process the information, watched the understanding reshape her features, watched 18 years of questions finally find their answers. He is my father. It was not a question. It was an acknowledgement. Yes. And he knows. Now. After last night. Yes. Celeste stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to her mother, her shoulders tight with tension. Willa did not follow her. She understood the need for space, for time to absorb what had just been revealed, for the privacy to feel whatever was rising inside her without being observed. Why did you never tell me? Celeste asked finally. Her voice was thick with something that might have been anger or grief or both. I was protecting you. From what? From rejection. From hoping for something that might never come. From spending your whole life wondering why your father did not want you. So instead I spent my whole life wondering why I did not know anything about him. I spent my whole life sensing that there was something you were not telling me, something that made you sad when you thought I was not looking. I know. You could have trusted me. The accusation was fair. It landed exactly where it was meant to land. You are right, Willa said quietly. I could have trusted you. I should have trusted you. I made choices in crisis and I maintained them out of fear and I told myself I was protecting you when maybe I was also protecting myself. Celeste turned from the window. Her eyes were wet but her face was composed, the expression of someone who was choosing to feel her emotions rather than be overwhelmed by them. What happens now? That is up to you. He wants to meet you. But you get to decide whether that happens. You get to decide what role, if any, he plays in your life going forward. What do you want? I want you to have whatever you need. If you need to know him, I will support that. If you need to never see him again, I will support that too. But what do you want for yourself? Do you want to see him again? Willa considered the question. It was not something she had allowed herself to think about during the long night of preparation. Her focus had been on Celeste, on minimizing the damage, on making sure her daughter had the information she needed to make her own choices. But Celeste was asking about her. About what she wanted. About the feelings she had been carrying for 19 years without ever being asked to name them. I do not know, she admitted. I loved him once. What he did nearly destroyed me. Seeing him last night was like having a wound reopened that I thought had healed. But he looked broken. He looked like someone who has spent 19 years regretting a choice he cannot undo. And part of me, the part that still remembers what we had, wants to know if there is anything left worth saving. Celeste nodded slowly. She crossed the kitchen and sat beside her mother, reaching for her hand the way she had done as a child when she needed connection. I am angry, she said quietly. I am angry at him for leaving and I am angry at you for not telling me and I am angry at a situation that seems designed to hurt everyone involved. I know. But I also need to meet him. I need to see who he is. I need to understand the other half of myself that has always felt like a blank space. Willa squeezed her daughter's hand. The gesture was insufficient for the magnitude of the moment, but it was all she had to offer. Then we will figure out how to make that happen. Together. Together. The word hung between them, a promise and a reassurance and a reminder that whatever came next, they would face it the way they had faced everything else. Side by side. Bound by a love that had survived 19 years of silence and would survive whatever came after. The days that followed were strange and suspended, caught between what had been and what might be. Willa returned to the museum and her work with the Flemish altarpiece, but her concentration was fractured. She found herself staring at the Virgin Mary's frightened face and seeing her own fear reflected back at her. She found herself thinking about the angel's announcement, about the way lives could change in a single moment of revelation, about the particular terror of receiving news that would reshape everything you thought you knew. Dr. Aldine noticed her distraction but said nothing. He simply worked beside her in companionable silence, offering his presence as a form of support that did not require words. Celeste returned to her university classes, but Willa could see the weight she was carrying. Her daughter moved through the apartment with a quietness that was unlike her usual energy, processing internally in ways that Willa could sense but not access. They spoke about practical things, about groceries and schedules and the ordinary logistics of shared life. They did not speak about Everett. The silence felt fragile, like something that needed to be broken but could not be broken yet. On the fourth day, Celeste came home from class and announced that she had made a decision. I am going to meet him. I have been thinking about it all week and I need to know who he is. Not for his sake. For mine. Willa set down the book she had been pretending to read. She had been expecting this. Had been preparing for it in the quiet spaces between other thoughts. Do you want me to arrange it? No. I will contact him myself. I have his email from the foundation website. I want to do this on my own terms. What do you want those terms to be? A public place. Neutral ground. Just him and me. I do not want lawyers or assistants or anyone else involved. That seems wise. Celeste hesitated, then sat beside her mother on the couch. Will you be okay with me doing this? I will be okay. Willa reached for her daughter's hand. This is your choice to make. Whatever you need from this meeting, whatever you discover, it will not change anything between us. I know. Do you? Celeste met her eyes with an intensity that reminded Willa, painfully, of Everett at 28. The same directness. The same refusal to look away from difficult truths. I know that you are my mother. I know that you raised me and sacrificed for me and gave me everything I needed to become who I am. I know that nothing I learn about him will undo that. But I also need to understand where I come from. All of it. Not just the half I have known. Willa nodded slowly. She had spent 18 years trying to be enough, trying to fill the space that Celeste's absent father had left, trying to give her daughter a complete life despite the incompleteness at its foundation. She had done her best. It had not been enough. And that was not a failure. That was simply the truth of loving someone you could not fully protect. When will you meet him? This weekend. Sunday afternoon. There is a coffee shop near campus that I know well. Public enough to feel safe. Private enough to actually talk. Do you want to talk about what you will say? No. Celeste's voice was firm. I need to go in without a script. I need to see who he is when he is not expecting specific questions. I need to judge him for myself, without your perspective coloring mine. That is fair. It is not about fairness. It is about the fact that you loved him once and he hurt you, and I cannot be objective about him if I am carrying your feelings instead of my own. The observation was more mature than Willa had expected. More perceptive than she had prepared for. Her daughter was already separating from her, already claiming the independence that this moment required, already becoming the woman who would navigate her own relationship with her father without maternal interference. It was exactly what Willa had raised her to do. And it was heartbreaking in ways she had not anticipated. I am proud of you, Willa said quietly, for being brave enough to do this. I learned bravery from you. The words landed like a gift. Willa held them carefully, adding them to the collection of moments that had made the past 18 years worthwhile. I will be here, she said. Whenever you get back. However it goes. I will be here. I know. Celeste squeezed her hand once, then rose and walked to her room, already composing in her mind the email that would set everything in motion. Sunday arrived with the particular weight of significant days. Willa woke early and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the morning light change across the city skyline. Celeste emerged at 9, dressed carefully in clothes that suggested neither desperation nor indifference. She ate breakfast without speaking, her attention turned inward, preparing herself for the conversation ahead. At 1:30, she gathered her bag and walked to the door. Celeste. Her daughter turned, and Willa saw in her face the same combination of fear and determination that she had felt 19 years ago, walking into an uncertain future with nothing but her own strength to rely on. Whatever happens today, Willa said, remember that you do not owe him anything. You do not owe him forgiveness or understanding or a relationship. You only owe yourself the truth of knowing who he is. I know. And if it goes badly, if he is not what you hoped, that is not your fault and it is not about you. I know that too. Celeste smiled then, a real smile, and for a moment she looked exactly like the child Willa had raised, the girl who had trusted her mother completely, the person she had been before the weight of hidden history had begun to press down on her. I love you, Celeste said. I love you too. Then she was gone, and Willa was alone with the waiting. The coffee shop was small and familiar, a place where Celeste had spent countless hours studying and writing and working on the paintings that had brought her to this moment. She arrived 15 minutes early and claimed a table near the window, where she could see the door and anyone who approached. He arrived exactly on time. Everett Drummond looked different than he had at the exhibition. Less polished. More human. He wore casual clothes rather than a formal suit, and his face carried the evidence of sleepless nights and difficult processing. He scanned the coffee shop with an uncertainty that seemed at odds with everything Celeste had read about him, with a confident patron who commanded rooms and funded institutions and lived a life of apparent ease. Then he saw her, and everything in his expression changed. Celeste. He crossed to her table slowly, as if approaching something fragile. May I sit? Please. He settled into the chair across from her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. Exactly. It was more like the silence between two people who had so much to say that they did not know where to begin. Thank you for agreeing to meet me, Everett said finally. I know you did not have to. I did not do it for you. I know. I did it for me. Because I need to understand who you are. Not the version of you that exists in my mother's memories. The version that exists now. Everett nodded slowly. The honesty seemed to relieve something in him, as if he had been bracing for hostility and found directness instead. What do you want to know? Everything. But we can start with why you left. The question landed between them, heavy with 19 years of weight. Everett looked at the table, at his hands, at the window, at anything except his daughter's face. I was weak, he said finally. That is the simplest answer and also the truest one. My father presented me with consequences, with threats against your mother, with a version of reality that seemed impossible to resist. And instead of fighting him, instead of protecting the woman I loved, I ran. What kind of threats? He told me that if I stayed with her, he would destroy her. Her scholarships. Her career. Her future. He had the power to do it. I had seen him do it before, to people who stood in his way. And I believed that leaving was the only way to keep her safe. But you did not tell her that. You just disappeared. I was not brave enough to face her. I was not strong enough to explain. I convinced myself that a clean break would be easier for her, that she would move on and build a life without me weighing her down. Did you believe that? I told myself I believed it. I do not know if I actually did. Celeste absorbed this. She had expected excuses, justifications, the kind of explanations that shifted blame onto circumstances rather than choices. What she received instead was an admission of weakness, a confession of cowardice, an acknowledgement that he had failed in ways that could not be undone. It was not enough. But it was honest. Did you know about me? She asked. No. Not until the exhibition. I knew that your mother was pregnant, but my father told me she had taken money and signed an agreement and disappeared. He showed me documents that seemed to prove it. I believed him for years. But the documents were false. Yes. I found out after he died. There was no payment. No agreement. He lied to keep me compliant, and I was too weak to question him. And after you found out the truth, did you look for her then? I had been looking all along. From the beginning. Investigators, databases, every resource I could access. But she had built a life specifically designed to be unfindable. She did not want to be found, and she was very good at hiding. Celeste thought about her mother. About the years of moving from apartment to apartment. About the way Willa had always been careful about what information she shared, what traces she left, what connections she made. She had assumed it was simply caution, the natural wariness of a single mother navigating a difficult world. Now she understood it was intentional. Calculated. The strategy of someone who was actively avoiding being discovered. Why did you search for her? Celeste asked. If you believed she had taken the money and left. Because I loved her. Because even when I believed the worst about her, I could not stop hoping that there was an explanation I did not understand. Because 19 years of marriage to someone else never made me stop thinking about the 7 months I spent with her. The admission was raw. Painful. Everett's voice cracked on the final words, and Celeste saw moisture gathering in his eyes. She had expected to hate him. Had prepared herself for the righteous anger that seemed appropriate to the situation. But looking at this man, this stranger who shared her blood, she found that hatred was not what she felt. What she felt was sadness. For him. For her mother. For the 19 years that could not be recovered, the moments that had been lost, the family that had never had the chance to exist. What do you want from me? She asked. Now. Going forward. Everett wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not trying to hide the emotion. I want to know you. I want to understand who you have become. I want the chance to be part of your life, in whatever capacity you are willing to allow. And if I am not willing to allow anything, then I will respect that. I have no claims here. I have no rights. I have only the hope that you might find something worth knowing in the person I am now, even if the person I was then failed you completely. Celeste considered this. She thought about her mother, waiting at home, carrying the weight of a conversation she could not participate in. She thought about the painting she had created, the themes of absence and inheritance that she had not fully understood until now. She thought about the blank space on her family tree that had always bothered her, the questions she had learned not to ask, the half of herself that had remained unexplored. I am not ready to forgive you, she said finally. I do not know if I will ever be ready for that. What you did to my mother, what your absence cost both of us, that cannot be erased with explanations. I understand. But I am willing to know you. Slowly. On my terms. Without any expectation of what that might become. Everett's face transformed. The hope that had been lurking beneath his grief surfaced, tentative and fragile and achingly human. That is more than I deserve. I know. They talked for another hour. About her paintings. About his foundation. About the strange coincidence that had brought them together in a gallery funded by his money, built by her talent, connected by a history neither of them had fully understood. It was not a reconciliation. It was not forgiveness. It was simply the beginning of something that might, over time, become a relationship. When they finally parted, Celeste walked home slowly, processing everything she had learned. The man she had met was not the villain she had imagined. He was not the heartless abandoner her anger had constructed. He was a flawed human being who had made devastating choices and spent 19 years regretting them. It was not enough to erase the damage. But it was enough to imagine a future where understanding might be possible. The months that followed were a study in patience. Celeste met with Everett once a week, then twice, then with increasing frequency as trust slowly accumulated between them. They talked about art and business and the particular pressures of being raised with expectations you did not choose. They disagreed about politics and money and the responsibilities of wealth. They discovered shared habits and opposing preferences and the strange ways that genetics express themselves across generations. Willa watched from a distance, supporting without interfering. She answered Celeste's questions when asked. She refrained from offering opinions when not asked. She maintained the boundary between her own complicated feelings and her daughter's right to form independent judgments. It was harder than she had expected. The jealousy was not something she had anticipated, the particular sting of watching Celeste build a relationship with a man who had abandoned them both. She told herself it was healthy. She told herself it was what she wanted. She told herself that her daughter's expanding family did not diminish the family they had always been. Most days, she believed it. Everett, for his part, made no demands. He attended Celeste's exhibitions without requesting acknowledgement. He funded a conservation fellowship in Willa's name without telling her. He existed at the edges of their lives, present but not pressing, waiting for invitations he knew he had not earned. The divorce from Marguerite was finalized 6 months after the exhibition. Willa heard about it through Celeste, who mentioned it casually over dinner one evening as if it were merely interesting rather than significant. He says the marriage was never real, Celeste said, pushing pasta around her plate. He says it was an arrangement that satisfied everyone's families but never meant anything to either of them. Did he tell you why he stayed in it so long? He says he did not know how to leave. He says that by the time he understood it was empty, he could not imagine anything different. He says he was living the life everyone expected and forgot to ask whether it was the life he wanted. That sounds like him, Willa said quietly. Celeste looked up from her plate. Do you still love him? The question hung in the air between them. It was not something Willa had allowed herself to consider directly. It was easier to focus on the practicalities, on the logistics of their slowly expanding family, on the careful work of rebuilding something that had been destroyed so thoroughly. I do not know, she admitted. I loved the person he was 19 years ago. I do not know who he is now. But you want to find out. I want to find out. The admission surprised her. She had spent so long protecting herself from wanting anything connected to Everett that the acknowledgement felt like a door opening to a room she had kept locked for decades. He asks about you, Celeste said. Every time we meet. He wants to know how you are. What you are working on. Whether you are happy. What do you tell him? The truth. That you are brilliant at your work. That you have built a life that has meaning. That you carry something heavy that he put there 19 years ago. Does he respond to that? He cries sometimes. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like someone who is grieving something they lost before they knew they had it. Willa was quiet for a long moment. She had not allowed herself to think about Everett's grief. It had been easier to hold on to anger, to remember the abandonment without considering the cost of it to him. But Celeste was offering her a different perspective. A window into the man he had become. And what she saw through that window was not the monster she had constructed in her mind. It was someone broken. Someone lost. Someone who had spent 19 years building something hollow and was only now beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had sacrificed to build it. 2 years after the exhibition, on an ordinary Sunday afternoon in October, Everett appeared at the apartment door. Celeste had given him the address weeks earlier, but he had not used it. He had waited, as he had waited for everything, for some indication that his presence would be welcome. I did not come to demand anything, he said, standing in the doorway that Willa had passed through 10,000 times. I just wanted you to know that I think about what we lost every day. Not as something I was owed. As something I failed to fight for. Willa looked at this man. This stranger who had been the great love of her youth. This ghost who had haunted her for 19 years. This father who was slowly learning to earn the title. Is that an apology? She asked. It is acknowledgement. I do not know if I am capable of apology that means anything. She considered him for a long moment. The grey at his temples. The lines around his eyes. The particular weariness of someone who had carried weight for too long without setting it down. Acknowledgement is where it starts, she said finally. Forgiveness takes longer. How much longer? I do not know. Years. Maybe. Maybe forever. Maybe never. And if it is never, then it is never. And you will have to find a way to live with that. He nodded slowly. The answer was not what he hoped for. But it was more than he had expected. May I come in? He asked. Willa looked at the doorway. At the threshold that separated the life she had built from the life she had lost. At the man who had broken her heart standing on one side, asking permission to enter the space where she had healed. Yes, she said finally. You may come in. He crossed the threshold carefully. The apartment was small, modest, entirely different from the world he had inhabited for the past 2 decades. But it was warm. It was lived in. It was full of the accumulated evidence of a life that had been built with love and determination and sacrifice. Celeste was waiting in the living room. She smiled when she saw them enter together, and something in her expression suggested that she had been hoping for this moment, had been working toward it in ways that neither of her parents had fully recognized. "Tea?" she asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "Please," Everett said. They sat together in the small living room, three people who were learning to become a family. The conversation was careful. The silences were not entirely comfortable. But there was something there that had not existed before. A possibility. A beginning. A foundation on which something might be built. "I need to say something," Everett said finally, looking at Willa with a directness that reminded her of the young man she had loved in the library. "I know I cannot undo 19 years. I know that nothing I say or do will restore what we lost. But I want you to know that I have never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. And if there is any chance, any possibility at all, that we could build something new." He trailed off, leaving the sentence incomplete. The question hanging between them. Willa looked at him. Then at Celeste. Then at the apartment that had been her refuge for years. "I am not the person I was 19 years ago," she said quietly. "I am not the girl who believed that love could conquer everything. I have learned too much. I have been hurt too deeply. I do not know if I am capable of trusting you again. I understand. But I am also tired of being afraid. I am tired of carrying this weight alone. And I would like to find out if there is something worth saving. Slowly. Carefully. Without any promises about where it might lead." The words hung in the air between them. Not a declaration. Not a commitment. Just an opening. A willingness to see what was possible. "That is more than I deserve," Everett said. "I know." Celeste watched her parents look at each other across a distance that had taken 19 years to cross. She saw the fear in both of them. The hope. The uncertainty. The courage it took to remain open to possibility after everything that had happened. She had brought them to this moment. Not intentionally, not by design, but through the simple act of submitting her paintings to a competition, of earning a place in a gallery, of bringing two people together who might otherwise have spent the rest of their lives apart. It was not her responsibility to heal them. But she could witness. She could support. She could be present for whatever came next. The three of them talked until evening. About the past. About the future. About the strange and winding path that had brought them to this living room, this moment, this possibility. There were no grand gestures. No dramatic declarations. Just three people trying to figure out how to become a family. When Everett finally left, Willa walked him to the door. They stood together in the hallway, not touching, not speaking, just breathing the same air for the first time in 19 years without walls between them. "Same time next week?" he asked. "Same time next week." He smiled then. A real smile, not the polished expression she remembered from the exhibition. The smile she had fallen in love with 20 years ago in a library where he had helped her reach a book on the top shelf. "Thank you," he said. "Do not thank me yet. We have a long way to go." "I know. But at least we are going." She watched him walk down the hallway toward the stairs. He looked different from behind than he had looked arriving. Less burdened. Less hollow. Like someone who had set down a weight he had been carrying for far too long. When she returned to the living room, Celeste was waiting with a question in her eyes. "Are you okay?" her daughter asked. "I am okay." "What happens now?" Willa sat beside her daughter on the couch, looking at the walls that had held their life together for years. The paintings they had chosen together. The photographs of moments they had shared. The evidence of a family that had been complete without Everett and might, perhaps, become something different with him. "Now we see," she said. "We take it one day at a time. We build something new without trying to recreate what was lost. And if it does not work, then it does not work. And we will still have what we have always had. Each other." Celeste leaned against her mother's shoulder, the way she had done as a child when she needed comfort. The gesture was familiar. Grounding. A reminder that whatever changed, some things remained constant. "I love you," Celeste said. "I love you too." They sat together in the living room as the evening light faded through the windows. Two women who had built a life from the wreckage of abandonment, facing a future that contained possibilities neither of them had anticipated. The story was not over. There would be more conversations, more complications, more moments of doubt and difficulty. Building a family from the ashes of old betrayals would take years. It would require patience and courage and the willingness to remain open to possibility even when openness felt dangerous. But for now, in this moment, there was enough. There was a daughter who had brought her parents back together. There was a mother who had learned to hope again. There was a father who had finally found the courage to earn what he had lost. And there was the beginning of something new. Fragile and uncertain and achingly real. It was not the ending Willa had imagined 19 years ago, when she was young and in love and full of dreams about the future. It was better. Because this ending had been earned. Through pain and patience and the slow accumulation of choices made in service of love rather than fear. The light through the window was golden. The city sounds drifted up from the street below. And somewhere in the distance, a future was beginning that none of them could have predicted. It would be imperfect. Complicated. Full of the particular challenges that came with rebuilding what had been destroyed. But it would be theirs. And that was enough. The end.